We always knew we weren't alone, but we never expected the cosmos to be so brutally bureaucratic. When the Orion Syndicate voted to quarantine Earth, they didn't send an armada of warships. They sent surgical strike teams, ghosts, phantoms that wiped out 3 of our frontier colonies before breakfast, leaving 0 forensic evidence. They thought humans were soft, fragmented by politics, and easily pruned from the galactic garden. They were fundamentally wrong. You see, the Council sent their most revered ancient killers to handle us. In response, Earth didn't send soldiers, diplomats, or politicians. We opened Snorts, the darkest black sites of the military-industrial complex. We sent monsters. Welcome back to HFY Stories. Sit back, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's dive into the abyss. High above the ecliptic plane of Kepler 186f, the stealth frigate Whispering Blade hovered in the magnetic shadow of the planet's largest moon. Aboard the vessel, Commander Valen adjusted the biometric seals on his combat rig. Snorts was a kaolin, a species whose biology had been engineered for predation long before they achieved spaceflight. His skin was a mottled light-absorbing gray, and his 4 eyes blinked independently, Snorts processing different spectrums of light. For 1,000 years, the kaolin had served as the Galactic Council scalpel. When a fledgling species grew too ambitious, too expansive, or too unpredictable, the Council didn't wage war. War was expensive. War disrupted trade routes. Instead, they authorized a sanction. They sent the kaolin, target facility confirmed. His lieutenant siren hissed through the neural link. The mammals call it Outpost Prometheus, jointly funded by their primitive mega-corporations SpaceX and Northrop Grumman. Population is 214. Primary target is Dr. William Hawley, Chief of Slip Space Propulsion Research. Defenses? Valen asked, his vocal cords vibrating with a low clicking hum. Laughable kinetic barrier nets. Standardist issue projectile weaponry. Their sensors cannot pierce our shroud tech. We will be ghosts. Execute the drop, Valen ordered. Within minutes, 6 drop pods detached from the frigate, painted with radar-absorbing polymers that made them invisible to the rudimentary human arrays below. They fell through the atmosphere like silent meteors, splashing down in the frozen methane swamps just outside the perimeter of Outpost Prometheus. The human colony was an ugly utilitarian sprawl of pressurized domes and tungsten-reinforced corridors. It lacked any artistic grace, reflecting the desperate, scrambling nature of their species. Valen and his 5 operatives engaged their active camouflage. Light bent around them, rendering them virtually undetectable. They moved with terrifying speed, scaling the outer walls of the primary research dome without making a single sound. Inside the security control room, 2 human guards were drinking synthesized coffee. Their eyes glazed over as they stared at dozens of monitor feeds. They never saw the breach. Valen's plasma blade, a weapon of contained stellar heat, ignited for a microsecond. The reinforced permaglass window dissolved. Before the pressure alarms could even register the atmospheric drop, Valen was inside. A swift decapitating strike neutralized the first guard. A thrown monomolecular disc severed the spine of the second. Perimeter secured, commencing the purge. Valen signaled to his squad. What followed was not a battle, it was an extermination. The kaolin moved through the corridors like a liquid shadow. They bypassed the heavy bulkheads by cutting through the maintenance shafts. When the human scientists and engineers realized they were under attack, panic ensued. Alarms blared, bathing the sterile white corridors in strobing crimson light. Security personnel rushed to the choke points, raising their heavy rifles, their hands shaking as they aimed at empty air. The kaolin simply walked through the crossfire. They struck from the ceiling, from the vents, from the shadows. Plasma blades cauterized wounds instantly, leaving a trail of sterile, bloodless corpses. Deep in the central laboratory, Dr. William Hawley barricaded the heavy blast doors. Snorts, he was a man in his late 60s, brilliant but physically fragile. He watched the internal security feeds on his data pad with mounting horror. The cameras showed men and women, his friends, his colleagues, being dismantled by invisible forces. God Almighty, Hawley whispered, his fingers flying across the terminal. He knew he was dead. The priority now was data preservation. He initiated a burst transmission, bypassing the local comms buoy and routing the signal through a classified DARPA relay hidden in the asteroid belt. He compiled the telemetry of the attack, the thermal signatures of the invisible killers, and a final desperate warning. The heavy blast door groaned. The tungsten steel began to glow cherry red, then blinding white. Transmission sending 30%, the computer announced in a calm female voice. The center of the door melted into slag, collapsing inward. Valen stepped through the breach, his active camouflage flickering off to reveal his towering armored form. He looked at the frail human standing by the console. William Holly Valen clicked his translator collar, rendering his alien syntax into harsh metallic English. Your species is a weed in the cosmic garden. The council mandates a pruning transmission complete. The computer chimed. Holly looked up at the towering alien, his terror suddenly replaced by a grim fatalistic defiance. You think you're gardeners? Holly spat. You just woke up the locusts. Valen didn't bother to reply. He raised his plasma blade and ended the human's life. Back on the whispering blade, Valen submitted his report to the council executive. Sanction complete, target eliminated, 0 Kalen casualties. The humans offer no credible resistance. They are soft, emotional, and disorganized. Executor Zyler's hologram flickered on the bridge. Excellent, Commander. Proceed to the next coordinate on the manifest. GISA 832 see a mining operation. Break their supply chains, remind them of their place. It will be done, Valen said. He felt a fleeting sense of boredom. Killing humans was too easy. It lacked the honor of a true hunt. 3 days later, deep beneath the bedrock of the Rocky Mountains, the Cheyenne Snorts mountain complex hummed with a tense, frantic energy. General Thomas Sterling stood at the head of a massive hollow table in the subterranean command center. He was a veteran of the resource wars, a man carved from granite and stubbornness. Beside him stood Director Olivia Croft, the head of the newly formed Office of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. The hollow table projected the horrific aftermath of Outpost Prometheus. The footage recovered from Dr. Holly's final transmission was fragmented but clear enough. 214 personnel, Sterling rasped, leaning heavily on the edge of the table, wiped out in less than 20 minutes. No breaches in the outer defense net. No inbound ships detected by the early warning systems. Just ghosts. Not ghosts, General Croft corrected, her voice cold and analytical. She brought up a secondary screen showing thermal imaging enhanced by predictive algorithms. Holly's terminal caught a microsecond of thermal bloom when their cloaks deactivated to strike. They are biological, highly advanced infantry. Our analysts believe this is a targeted decapitation strike by the Galactic Council. They're scared of our slip space program. If they are scared, why not glass the planet from orbit? Sterling asked. Because they are bureaucrats, Croft replied. Orbital bombardment leaves a mess. It disrupts the local gravity wells and angers the interstellar trade guilds. This is an assassination. They think if they cut off our best minds and terrorize our colonies, we will retreat back to Earth and stay quiet. Sterling scowled. We need to send the Marines, the orbital drop shock units. We need to fortify the remaining colonies. General, with all due respect, standard infantry will just be target practice, Croft said, meeting his hard gaze without flinching. You saw the footage. Their cloaking technology renders our targeting systems useless. Their reaction times are at least triple that of a baseline human. If we send regular soldiers, we will lose. Then what the hell do you suggest, Olivia? We just roll over. Croft took a slow breath. She reached into her blazer and withdrew a biometric key card, placing it on the hollow table. We initiate Protocol Wendigo. Sterling stared at the black card as if it were a venomous snake. The blood drained from his face. Are you out of your mind? Congress shut that down. The UN tribunal declared it a crime against humanity. The subjects they aren't human anymore. They are exactly what we need. Croft insisted. The council sent their apex predators. It's time we introduce them to ours. The private sector, specifically the Black Ops division of Lockheed Martin, never actually dismantled the project. They just moved it off the books to a DARPA black site in Antarctica. We have a dozen assets in cryostasis ready to be deployed. Sterling rubbed his jaw. If this gets out, we'll be court-martialed and executed. If we don't do this, there won't be a human race left to execute us, Croft countered. 10 hours later, a supersonic stealth transport touched down on the frozen wasteland of the Ross Ice Shelf. Sterling and Croft descended into the ice, taking an elevator down to a facility that didn't exist on any map. The air was frigid, smelling of ozone and antiseptic. Dr. Aries Thorne Waite, a scientist in a white lab coat, greeted them. Let's call him Dr. Gregory Haussmann, the lead architect of the Wendigo Initiative. He looked exhausted, his eyes underscored by heavy dark circles. Director Croft, General Haussmann said, leading them through a heavily fortified blast door. I received the activatio. N codes, we've begun the thawing process for Team Onyx. They entered a massive cylindrical chamber. Embedded in the walls were vertical cryopods frosted over with thick ice. Inside each pod was a heavily augmented human figure. Remind me what I'm looking at, Dr. Sterling said, suppressing a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The culmination of 50 years of illegal genetic and cybernetic tampering, Haussmann said, a hint of dark pride in his voice. We didn't just enhance their muscles or reflexes, we fundamentally altered their nervous systems. We stripped out the amygdala, they feel absolutely no fear. We severed the emotional receptors linked to empathy and hesitation. Their skeletons are laced with carbon nanotubes, making them virtually unbreakable. But the real triumph is the neural lace. Haussmann tapped a tablet, bringing up a 3D model of a human brain wrapped in a glowing silver web. They are constantly linked to a predictive combat AI. When they fight, they aren't just reacting. The AI analyzes micro-movements, air pressure changes, and environmental data to predict enemy actions seconds before they happen. They don't fight, they execute mathematical certainties. A loud hissing sound filled the chamber as the central pod began to defrost. The heavy seals unlocked and a thick cloud of freezing vapor poured onto the floor. Snort stepping out of the vapor was Jackson Ford. He was entirely naked, his body a canvas of synthetic muscle fibers and subdermal armor plating. His eyes were the most unsettling feature. They were pitch black, the sclera completely replaced by optical sensors that warred as they adjusted to the light. He looked at Sterling and the general felt a primal evolutionary panic spike in his chest. Ford didn't look at him like a soldier looks at a superior officer. He looked at him the way a butcher looks at a slab of meat. Status Asset Prime. Haussmann asked cognitive functions at 100%. Ford replied. His voice was entirely devoid of inflection or emotion. It was the voice of a machine wearing a human skin, awaiting mission parameters. Croft stepped forward holding up a data pad with the footage of the alien killers. These entities are hunting our colonists. They utilize active camouflage and plasma weaponry. Can you track them? Ford's black eyes focused on the screen. He stared at it for exactly 2 seconds. Thermal masking is imperfect. Environmental displacement, footprints, dust disturbance, micro-vacuums created by their movement can be mapped by the neural AI. They are stealth units, which means their armor is structurally weak to prioritize speed. High-velocity explosive penetrator rounds will shatter their biological frames. Ford looked back at Croft. Yes, we can track them. We can kill them. Your target is the Gliesa 832C mining colony. Croft said they are headed there next. I want you to get there first. I want you to set a trap. And Ford, the augmented soldier, tilted his head a fraction of an inch. I want you to leave one alive, Croft said coldly. We need to send a message back to their bosses. Understood, Ford said. He turned to the other pods, which were now hissing open. Onyx team, gear up. We are going hunting. Gliesa 832C was a harsh, unforgiving world. The Rio Tinto mining colony, designated Outpost Tartarus, was carved directly into the side of a massive copy-rich canyon. Constant dust storms battered the exterior blast shields, creating a permanent howling roar that masked all other sounds. Commander Violin and his squad dropped into the canyon under the cover of a particularly violent squall. They engaged their active camouflage, becoming nothing more than ripples in the swirling red dust. Something is wrong. Siren clicked over the comms, his voice tinged with unease. The outer perimeter defense grids are offline, no power signatures from the guard towers. The mammals likely suffered a critical failure in their generators. Valen dismissed, his arrogance unshaken. Their technology is primitive and prone to breaking. It just makes our job easier. We sweep the main HAB blocks, execute the overseers, and sabotage the life support. The environment will finish the rest. They sliced through the main airlock door, bypassing the biometric scanners with a short-circuit pulse. The heavy door slid open, and the Kaelin stepped into the primary loading bay of the mining facility. It was pitch black. The emergency lighting was disabled. The only sound was the distant hum of a failing ventilation fan. Valen's 4 eyes shifted to infrared, sweeping the massive cavern. Crates of refined ore were stacked in towering rows, creating a maze of shadows. There were no thermal signatures, no terrified heartbeats. Spread out, Violin ordered. They may be hiding in the subterranean shelters. The 6 Kaelin dispersed, moving with absolute silence. Siren took the left flank, moving between 2 massive industrial haulers. He kept his plasma blade deactivated to avoid giving away his position, relying on his natural night vision and the squad's tactical network. Suddenly, a static hiss erupted in Siren's neural link. Click, it was a small sound, almost imperceptible. Siren paused, his predatory instincts flaring. He looked down. Embedded in the floor plating was a tiny localized gravity mine. Before he could warn the others, it detonated. It wasn't an explosive, it was a gravimetric tether. A localized singularity activated for a millisecond, ripping the surrounding air and matter downward. Siren, despite his immense strength, was yanked violently to the floor, his active camouflage flickering and failing as the gravitational shear disrupted his suit's micro-projectors. From the darkness above, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling. It was heavily armored, entirely matte black, and moved with a terrifying mechanical fluidity. It didn't roar. It didn't hesitate. Jackson Ford dropped directly onto Siren's back. Before the alien could ignite his plasma blade, Ford's hands, reinforced with hydraulic servos, grasped the Kaelin's skull. With a sickening wet crunch, Ford twisted. Siren's neck snapped, his 4 eyes going wide before the light faded from them. Ford stood up, his armor completely absorbing the ambient light. 1 down, he transmitted through the encrypted Onyx network. 5 remaining. Engage at will. Across the loading bay, Valen heard Siren's vitals flatline on his HUD. Panic and emotion he hadn't felt in centuries clawed at the back of his throat. Ambush, Valen roared over the comms, defensive formation, ignite weapons. The remaining 5 Kaelin activated their plasma blades, illuminating the dark hangar in a ghostly blue light. They stood back to back, their cloaks dropping as they realized stealth was useless here. From the shadows, laughter echoed. It was a synthesized, distorted sound pumped through the colony's PA system. It wasn't the laughter of a human. It was a psychological weapon designed to disorient. "They are in the rafters," one of Valen's squadmates hissed, pointing his blade upward. A high-velocity, armor-piercing round tore through the darkness, striking the Kaelin square in the chest. The depleted uranium slug shattered the alien's kinetic barriers instantly, obliterating his sternum and exiting through his back in a spray of purple. He crumpled to the ground, dead before he hit the floor. "Return fire," Valen commanded, blindly firing a burst of plasma bolts into the upper catwalks. The superheated energy melted the metal grates but hit nothing else. "Targeting algorithms cannot lock." Another Kaelin panicked. "They have no thermal signatures. They are as cold as the room." Jackson Ford and his team had lowered their core body temperatures and engaged thermal dampening suits. To the Kaelin sensors, the humans simply didn't exist. 2 more Onyx operatives dropped from the shadows like predatory spiders. They didn't use firearms this time. They used monomolecular combat knives. The engagement was brutally short. The Kaelin swung their plasma blades, but the augmented humans moved with impossible AI-predicted precision. They stepped inside the guard of the alien warriors, their movements perfectly calculated to avoid the lethal heat of the plasma. Knives flashed in the dark, finding the weak points in the Kaelin armor, under the arms, beneath the jaw, behind the knees. Within 30 seconds, 3 more aliens lay dismembered and bleeding out on the cold metal floor. Valen was alone. The supreme hunter of the Galactic Council, a veteran of 100 pacification campaigns, was backing away, his plasma blade trembling in his hand. He was surrounded by the dark, and from the dark, 4 figures slowly emerged. They were human, yet entirely alien. Their black armor was slick with the purple blood of his squad. Their pitch-black eyes stared at him without a shred of anger, hatred, or triumph. They looked at him like he was a solved equation. "What are you?" Valen rasped, his translator struggling to convey the sheer terror in his voice. "You are not the humans we studied. You are not them." Jackson Ford stepped forward. He moved with a heavy, terrifying grace. He reached up and slowly removed his helmet, revealing his pale face and cybernetic eyes. "We are the humans you built," Ford said, his voice a dead, flat monotone. "You wanted to prune the garden, but you forgot that when you cut the flowers, all that's left are the thorns." Valen lunged, swinging his blade in a desperate final arc. Ford didn't even flinch. He sidestepped the strike with millimeter precision, his hydraulic arm shooting forward. His hand clamped around Valen's wrist, applying a crushing 2,000 lb of pressure per square inch. The alien's bones pulverized like chalk. Valen screamed, dropping the plasma weapon. Ford's other hand shot out, grabbing Valen by the throat, lifting the towering alien entirely off the ground. Valen choked, his legs kicking weakly in the air. Director Croft requested one olive. Ford said, staring into Valen's terrified eyes. You are the messenger. Ford reached to his belt and pulled out a small, heavy storage drive. He jammed it brutally into a port on Valen's armored chest plate, forcing the alien suit computer to download the file. Return to your council, Ford whispered, his grip tightening just enough to restrict airflow without crushing the windpipe. Deliver this file. It contains the coordinates of every world your species inhabits and the calculated time it will take for us to dismantle them. Tell your executive that the sanction has been cancelled. The extermination has begun. Ford threw the massive alien across the room. Valen crashed into a stack of crates, gasping for breath, clutching his ruined arm. He looked up, but the hangar was empty. The lights flickered back on. The Onyx team was gone. The only proof they were ever there was the butchered remains of Valen's squad and the terrifying message now burning a hole in his data banks. Humanity wasn't prey. They were the monster hiding under the galaxy's bed, light years away from the butchery at Giza 832. See the grand orbital citadel of the Orion Syndicate spun lazily in the jewel-toned nebula of Sector Prime. Aboard the station, the atmosphere was one of refined, sterile tranquility. The ruling class of the Galactic Council did not experience the dirt, blood, or terror of the frontier. They managed the galaxy through data pads, trade embargoes, and the occasional deployment of the Kalen caste. Commander Violin's return shattered that tranquility. His stealth frigate, the Whispering Blade, did not dock with the graceful, automated precision expected of military vessels. It slammed into the primary receiving bay of the Citadel, tearing through 3 magnetic containment fields and crushing snorts a dozen luxury transport yachts before the emergency dampeners seized its hull. Executor Zyler, a tall Avon-like bureaucrat draped in ceremonial gold silks, arrived at the docking ring flanked by heavily armed Citadel guards. He expected to find a technical malfunction or a mutiny. Instead, the frigate's primary airlock blew open with a violent hiss, and Valen stumbled down the ramp. The Kalen commander was a ruin. His biomechanical armor was stripped and dented, caked in the dried purple blood of his slaughtered squad. His right arm hung uselessly at his side, the bones pulverized into a fine powder by a grip strength that defied biological logic. Valen collapsed to his knees at the base of the ramp, his 4 eyes wide and unblinking, staring at nothing. Commander Valen, Zyar barked, his beak clicking in agitation. Explain this disgrace. Where is the rest of your sanction team? Did the mammalian colonists possess heavy ordnance? Valen slowly looked up at the executive. The arrogance that usually defined the Kalen species was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, consuming dread. They didn't use ordnance, executive. They used monsters. We were hunted in the dark. They ripped Siren apart with their bare hands. They felt no heat, made no sound. They are not the fragmented emotional creatures our sociologists documented. Zyar scoffed, waving a feathered hand dismissively. Delirium. You suffered a catastrophic mission failure and your mind is attempting to justify the incompetence. Medical staff sedate him. I will have him court-martialed for they left me alive. Valen interrupted, his voice a ragged mechanical rasp through his damaged translator collar. He reached into his shattered chest plate with his good hand and pulled out the heavy, blocky human storage drive. The entity, the one clad in black, he told me to deliver this to you. He said the extermination has begun. Zyar eyed the crude metallic device with profound distaste. He gestured for a technician to take it. A primitive storage medium. Take it to the isolation labs. Air-gap the diagnostic terminal. I want to know what these apes consider a threat. Within the hour, Zyler stood in the Citadel's heavily shielded cybernetics laboratory. A reinforced permaglass wall separated him from the standalone terminal where the human drive had been inserted. The architecture is archaic. Executive, the lead technician. An insectoid creature named Krell reported from the console. Solid-state memory, but the encryption is deeply aggressive. It's actively fighting my decryption algorithms. "Crack it," Zyar ordered. "I want to see what desperate bluff they have sent." The screen flickered. The alien decryption software pierced the outer shell of the human code. Suddenly, the terminal speakers emitted a sound that made Zyar's feathers stand on end, a low rhythmic thumping. It sounded like an ancient war drum. The screen did not display a written message or a list of demands. Instead, it played a brutally compiled montage of human history. The footage was entirely silent except for the thumping drum. It showed the trenches of World War I, the nuclear detonations of Trinity and Here. Hiroshima, the firebombing of Dresden, and the napalm-soaked jungles of Vietnam. It showed endless lines of mass Rajus tanks, oceans of warships, and skies blackened by bomber planes. "What is the purpose of this?" Zyler murmured, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Are they boasting of their own barbarism?" "EXC," Krell said, his voice trembling. "There is a secondary file embedded beneath the visual data. It's a massive tactical database. It outlines the exact orbital trajectories of all 74 Council capital ships. It possesses the atmospheric compositions of our core worlds, the weak points in our planetary defense grids, and in what Zyar snapped. The estimated time required to wipe out our populations using kinetic bombardment. They snorts haven't just analyzed our defenses. They have mathematically plotted our genocide." Before Zyar could process the sheer scale of the threat, the terminal began to emit a high-pitched, screeching frequency. "Shut it down," Zyar yelled. "Sever the connection. I can't," Krell frantically typed on the console. But the alien interface was freezing, overridden by lines of aggressive, jagged red code. The drive wasn't just holding data. It's carrying a localized predictive algorithm. It's analyzing the acoustic vibrations of the terminal's cooling fans and the thermal output of the processor to bridge the air gap. It snorts, rewriting its own architecture to speak our machine language. Deep within the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, specifically tailored cyber warfare divisions funded by Palantir Technologies and the United States Cyber Command had built a digital virus that didn't just infect systems, it adapted to them. By the time Krell reached for the physical power cable, the terminal screen flashed bright crimson. A single line of text appeared in perfect translated galactic standard. "We see you across the grand orbital citadel, every light fixture, every life support monitor, and every automated defense turret simultaneously powered down for exactly 3 seconds. The station plunged into absolute terrifying darkness. When the lights flickered back on, the message on the isolated terminal was gone." "EXC," Krell whispered, backing away from the console. "They didn't just send a message, they just mapped our entire mainframe. Earth knows everything." Zyar stared at the screen, the reality of his mistake crashing down upon him. The Council had thought they were pruning a weed. Instead, they had invited a predator into their own home. "Mobilize the Grand Fleet," Zyler ordered, his voice devoid of its former arrogance. "Operation Purge is authorized. We do not stop until Earth is a ball of radioactive glass." Deep within the heavily shielded bunker of the Office of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, General Snorts Thomas Sterling stood motionless before the massive holographic projection of the Milky Way. Hundreds of red icons were blinking into existence, forming a massive converging armada heading toward the solar system. "The Palantir virus did its job," Director Olivia Croft said, sipping a cup of black coffee as she analyzed the cascading lines of telemetry on her data pad. "We have their fleet disposition, their slip space routing, and their estimated time of arrival. They are bringing 70 capital ships and over 300 escort frigate. If they enter our system, the orbital defense grid will hold for exactly 12 minutes before they overwhelm us." Sterling rubbed his temples. 12 minutes. So the Council finally decided to stop using scalpels and brought a sledgehammer. He turned to look at the far end of the war room where Jackson Ford stood perfectly still, his matte black armor absorbing the glow of the tactical displays. "What does your AI predict, Ford?" Ford's pitch-black optical sensors whirred as they process the holographic data. "A defensive posture results in a 0% probability of human survival. The alien capital ships possess plasma projectors capable of boiling our oceans. We cannot win a war of attrition, then we don't fight a war of attrition," Croft stated flatly. She tapped a command on her console and the hologram shifted from the galaxy map to a schematic of a massive brutalist spacecraft. It was ugly, angular, and plated in feet of solid tungsten and a blade of armor. "Gentlemen," Croft said, "meet the Revenant." Boeing's Phantom Works and General Dynamics have spent the last decade reverse engineering the slip space drive from a crashed scout ship we recovered in Roswell. Congress thought it was a black hole for funding. They didn't realize we actually finished it. Sterling stared at the massive vessel. "It has no main gun, it's just armor, engines, and a slip space core." "It doesn't need a main gun," Croft replied coldly, "because the Revenant isn't a battleship. It's a breaching pod, and we aren't going to wait for the Council's fleet to reach Earth." Ford stepped forward, his hydraulic servos whining softly. The Palantir virus isolated the navigational trajectory of the Council's flagship, the Invictus. They are routing their armada through a localized slip space corridor in the Oort cloud to mask their approach. The corridor restricts their formation. They must travel in a single file line. A fatal bottleneck, Sterling realized, a predatory grin touching the corners of his mouth. "You want to intercept them mid-transit. Standard physics do not apply in a slip space corridor," Croft explained, bringing up complex spatial equations on the display. "If a vessel is destroyed while inside the corridor, the resulting temporal shock wave will collapse the tunnel. It will crush the entire armada like tin cans under a hydraulic press. But to destroy the flagship from the inside," Sterling hesitated, looking at Ford, "you would have to ram the Revenant into the Invictus while both ships are traveling at faster than light speeds. The kinetic shearing alone would pulverize a baseline human into soup. Even with inertial dampeners, the G-forces will peak at over 100, which is why baseline humans are not executing this operation," Ford replied, his voice entirely devoid of fear or hesitation. "Team Onyx possesses carbon nanotube skeletal reinforcement and artificially suspended circulatory systems. Our organs are encased in kinetic-absorbing gels. We will survive the impact. The aliens will not." Sterling crossed his arms. "This is a suicide mission, Ford. Even if you breach their hull, you'll be trapped on a hostile flagship surrounded by thousands of their elite guards while the slip space tunnel collapses around you." "Correction, General," Ford said, his dark eyes locking onto Sterling. "They will be trapped with us." 72 hours later, the Revenant sat on the launch pad of a classified equatorial railgun facility. The ship was a monument to human defiance, a massive iron gay wedge designed for one singular violent purpose. Inside the claustrophobic drop bay of the Revenant, Jackson Ford and the 11 other members of Team Onyx locked themselves into their crash webbing. They did not speak. They did not pray. Their neural laces were already synchronized, communicating in microbursts of tactical data, plotting thousands of simulated boarding scenarios. "Onyx Actual, this is Control." Croft's voice crackled through the encrypted comms. "The alien armada has entered the slip space corridor. You have a 3-nut window to intercept before they exit the Oort cloud. Godspeed." Engaging primary thrusters, Ford replied tonelessly. The Revenant didn't launch so much as it was fired. The massive electromagnetic rails propelled the ship out of the atmosphere at 30,000 mph, crushing the augmented soldiers deep into their seats. The sky outside the viewport instantly turned from blue to the absolute black of the void, slip space spooling. The ship's automated voice announced, "Warning. Navigational intercept coordinates are highly unstable. Collision imminent. Override warnings. Execute jump." Ford commanded. Space tore open before them, a jagged, bleeding wound of violet and white light. The Revenant plunged into the slip space corridor. Inside the tunnel of warped reality, the alien flagship Invictus sailed confidently at the head of a massive 70-ship armada. On the bridge, executive Zyler watched the countdown timer to Earth's destruction. He felt a vindictive thrill. The humans had embarrassed him, terrified him. Now he would personally oversee their extinction. "EXC," the sensor officer screamed, his feathers puffing out in sheer panic. "A massive temporal anomaly detected directly in our flight path. It's materializing inside the corridor." "Impossible," Zyar roared. "Nothing can intercept a slip space." He never finished the sentence. Out of the swirling violet chaos of the tunnel, the Revenant appeared, traveling at a relative speed that defied all physical laws. It was a flying anvil of tungsten and rage. It struck the Invictus dead center, perfectly targeting the flagship's primary command spire. The sound of the impact was non-existent in the vacuum of the slip space bubble, but the kinetic transfer was apocalyptic. The Revenant's blade of armor peeled away like an onion, absorbing the heat as the ship buried itself hundreds of meters deep into the alien vessel's hull. Bulkheads shattered. Atmospheric pressure catastrophically failed, and thousands of alien crew members were instantly vaporized or sucked into the swirling vortex of the corridor. Deep inside the shattered bowels of the Invictus, the Revenant groaned to a halt, lodged in the burning wreckage of the flagship's main engineering deck. Inside the drop bay, the emergency lights flickered on, the crash webbing hissed, retracting into the seats. Jackson Ford stepped out of his harness. His armor was scarred and the kinetic dampeners in his suit were smoking. He cracked his cybernetic neck, the hydraulic servos warring loudly in the dead silence of the ship. He looked at the heavy breech door, which was currently fused to the alien ship's T. Rear hallway, breach successful, Ford transmitted to his team. He drew his heavy depleted uranium sidearm. Onyx team, let's show them why they should have stayed in the light. The engineering deck of the Invictus was a cathedral of alien technology. All sweeping curves, glowing plasma conduits, and anti-gravity generators. But to Jackson, Ford, and Team Onyx, it was simply a tactical environment to be cleared. As the Revenant cooled in the wreckage of the impact zone, the alien crew began to mobilize. Hundreds of Citadel Taurians, the Council's elite heavy infantry, clad in shimmering energy shields and wielding rotary plasma cannons, flooded the lower decks. They moved with disciplined precision, expecting to find dazed, injured crash survivors. Instead, the bulkheads blew outward in a storm of white-hot shrapnel. Onyx team didn't use standard explosives. They used shaped thermoric charges developed by a joint task force between Rathon and the British SAS. The blast instantly vaporized the oxygen in the corridor, suffocating the first wave of Taurians before the pressure wave liquefied their internal organs. Through the lingering smoke, the demons of Earth emerged. Ford took the vanguard. His Heckler & Koch XM70 magnetic rail rifle hummed as the internal capacitors charged. The weapon fired tungsten darts at Mach 8, completely ignoring the kinetic energy shields of the alien guards. The Snort's shields were designed to deflect plasma and standard ballistics. They couldn't calculate the mass and velocity of a depleted uranium penetrator until it had already passed through their chests. Target acquired. Trajectory mapped. Ford's neural AI whispered directly into his auditory cortex. A glowing red reticle appeared in his vision, highlighting an alien commander attempting to flank from an elevated catwalk. Ford didn't even look up. He pointed his rifle at a 45 degrees angle and pulled the trigger. The tungsten dart ripped through the graded floor of the catwalk, piercing the alien commander's skull from below. The body plummeted into the plasma conduits below. Spread formation, Ford ordered, his voice an emotionless bass line over the chaotic roar of weapons fire. Operatives Grant and Riley, secure the primary coolant lines. Do not destroy them. We need the reactor stable for another 9 minutes. Operative Bishop, with me to the command spire. The Taurians fought bravely, but bravery was a biological defect when facing Team Onyx. The humans moved like a synchronized swarm of locusts. When the aliens laid down suppressing fire, the augmented soldiers didn't seek cover. They calculated the exact RPM of the alien rotary cannons, found the milliseconds between plasma bursts, and moved through the lethal geometry unharmed. Operative Bishop, a towering behemoth whose skeletal structure was 90% artificial, ran out of ammunition for his primary weapon. An alien heavy gunner roared, charging him with a pulsing energy halyard. Bishop didn't draw a sidearm. He stepped into the swing, allowing the halberd to glance off his carbon nanotube-reinforced shoulder plate, and drove his hydraulic fist straight through the center of the alien's kinetic barrier. Bishop's fingers clamped around the Taurian's throat. With a sickening lurch, he ripped the alien's respiratory tract completely out of its body, tossing the organic mess to the floor. He picked up the dropped energy halberd, twirled it with terrifying mechanical precision, and hurled it down the corridor. It impaled 2 more guards, pinning them to the bulkhead. Ammunition depleted, Bishop reported calmly. Adapting to local hardware up on the bridge, Executive Zeiler watched the internal security feeds in absolute horror. He had commanded campaigns that subjugated entire star systems. He had crushed rebellions that spanned millions of light years, but he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't warfare. This was a meat grinder. How are they doing this? Zyar shrieked, his feathers shedding in a panis-induced maul. They are 12 bipeds. We have a garrison of 2,000. Executor, the ship's primary flight officer, shouted, his four eyes wide with terror as he stared at the navigational telemetry. The kinetic impact of their vessel. It destabilized our temporal field. The slip space corridor is collapsing behind us. Zyar looked at the external monitors. Outside the energy shielding of the Invictus, the violet swirling tunnel of faster-than-light travel was convulsing. Massive, jagged tiers of absolute blackness were ripping through the corridor. The escort fleet, Zyar whispered, the blood draining from his face. He watched in helpless agony as the rear guard of the Armada encountered the collapsing temporal waves. A sleek half-mile-long council frigate was caught in a gravitational shear. The front half of the ship was pulled forward at the speed of light, while the back half was violently snapped back into normal space. The vessel was spaghettified, stretched into a miles-long smee. Of burning metal and dying crewmen before blinking out of existence. One by one, the 69 escort ships following the Invictus were caught in the collapsing tunnel. They were crushed like aluminum cans, their reactors detonating in brilliant flashes of localized supernovas that only accelerated the corridor's collapse. They didn't just come to board us, Zyler realized, a profound, sickening clarity washing over him. They used us as a cork to plug the tunnel. They sacrificed their own ship to annihilate our fleet. Executor, the corridor collapse is catching up to us, the flight officer screamed. If we do not drop out of slip space immediately, the flagship will be crushed as well. Do it, Zyler commanded. Drop us into normal space, prepare all broadside batteries. If we materialize in their home system, we will burn their world to ash before we die. I cannot access the helm, the officer replied, his hands flying frantically across the holographic interface. The biometric locks have been overridden. Someone is actively rewriting our mainframe from the engineering deck. Deep in the bowels of the ship, Operative Grant knelt beside a severed alien console, his armored gauntlet hardwired directly into the ship's optical network. Back on Earth, the cyber warfare divisions of Palantir and the NSA had spent days analyzing the code from Commander Valen's suit. They hadn't just built a virus. They had built a skeleton key. Grant's neural AI was currently brute-forcing the flagship's firewall at 3 billion operations per second. Mainframe breached, Grant transmitted over the Onyx network. I have control of the slip space drive. I am locking the navigational array. Hold our current velocity, Ford ordered, kicking open the heavy doors to the primary transit elevator. Do not let them drop out of the corridor. Let the temporal collapse ride our engines. Understood, Grant replied. The bridge elevator is yours, actual. Give the executive my regards. The heavy permaglass doors of the bridge elevator hummed as they ascended the command spire. Inside, Ford, Snorts Bishop, and Riley stood in complete silence. Their armor was scorched, dented, and painted with the vivid luminescent blood of the alien garrison. They looked less like soldiers and more like industrial butchery equipment given sentience. Ding! The elevator doors slid open. The bridge of the Invictus was a massive sweeping dome of glass and polished metal. The remaining 30 Taurian guards had formed a semicircle around the elevator bank, their rotary cannons spinning up with a deafening whine. Behind them stood Executive Zyler, clutching a ceremonial plasma pistol, his Avon features contorted in a mask of desperate fury. Fire, Zyler screamed. Melt them down to the atoms. A blinding torrent of superheated plasma engulfed the elevator shaft. The temperature spiked to 6,000 degrees, instantly melting the elevator doors and the surrounding bulkheads into glowing slag. The sustained fire lasted for a full 10 seconds, draining the weapon's thermal capacitors. As the smoke cleared, Zyar leaned forward, expecting to see nothing but scattered ash. Instead, a thick metallic object the size of a dinner plate flew out of the smoke, landing directly in the center of the Taurian formation. It wasn't a grenade. It was a localized gravity inversion mine, a scaled-up version of the alien tech Earth had stolen and perfected via Boston Dynamics' classified Black Projects division. the mine activated with a horrific base-heavy thrum. Gravity within a 20 ft radius was instantly multiplied by a factor of 50. 15 Taurian guards were crushed into the floor instantly, snorts their armor flattening like foil, their internal organs bursting under the sudden immense weight. The remaining guards stumbled, disoriented by the gravitational shock wave. From the molten ruin of the elevator shaft, Team Onyx charged. Their thermal dampening suits were completely ruined, smoking and shedding scorched synthetic skin, but their carbon nanotube skeletons and hydraulic muscles were untouched. It was a massacre executed in terrifying silence. Riley moved through the surviving guards with a monomolecular trench knife, severing tendons, hamstrings, and spinal cords with surgical precision. Bishop simply used his mass, picking up an alien guard by the chest plate and using him as a battering ram to shatter the kinetic barriers of his comrades. Ford didn't bother with the guards. He walked in a perfectly straight line toward Executive Xyler. Plasma bolts grazed his armor, sparking against his reinforced plating, but he did not break his stride. Xyler raised his ceremonial pistol and fired point-blank at Ford's chest. The bolt struck true, melting a hole straight through Ford's outer armor, exposing the synthetic muscle fibers and metallic ribs beneath. Ford didn't even flinch. His severed pain receptors registered the extreme heat as nothing more than a blinking diagnostic warning on his HUD. Before Xyler could fire again, Ford's hand lashed out. He gripped the alien's wrist and twisted. The sound of breaking bone echoed loudly across the suddenly quiet bridge. The last of the Taurians lay dead or dying on the floor. Xyler dropped to his knees, gasping in agony, his grand ceremonial silk soaked in the blood of his men. Ford stood over him, towering and absolute. His pitch-black optical sensors warred as they locked onto the alien's terrified face. "You," Xyler choked out, spitting purple blood onto the polished deck. "You are not a species, you are a disease. You will crash this ship into your own planet. You will kill us all, but you will die with us." Ford reached out, grabbing Xyler by the collar and hauling him to his feet. He dragged the executive toward the primary tactical display, which was flashing bright red warnings of the collapsing slip space corridor just behind their engines. "Operative Grant," Ford spoke over the comms. "Status of the navigational array. Locked and loaded actual," Grant replied from the engineering deck. "I have bypassed the Invictus core safeguards. I am slaving the slip space bubble to the Revenant's mass shadow. We can anchor the flagship while the rest of the tunnel collapses. Do it and update our exit coordinates," Ford commanded. "Wait, what?" Xyler stammered, staring at the holographic map. The glowing red line that represented their trajectory toward Earth suddenly vanished. A new line appeared, recalculating in real time. It pointed directly backward, deep into the heart of the Orion Syndicate's territory. "You thought we came here to stop you," Ford said to the executive, his voice the same flat, dead monotone it had been since he was thawed from the ice. "You thought we wanted to protect our world. You fundamentally misunderstand human military doctrine." Xyler watched as the coordinates locked in. The destination wasn't Earth. It was Sector Prime, the Citadel. "General Sterling sends his regards," Ford whispered. "Disengage the engines," Xyler screamed, thrashing wildly in Ford's iron grip. "If we exit slip space at that velocity inside the Citadel's orbit, the kinetic displacement will crack the station in half. Millions of civilians live there. You ordered a sanction. We are delivering it," Ford replied. Behind them, the temporal collapse finally caught up to the flagship. The shockwave of reality snapping back into place slammed into the rear shielding of the Invictus. The massive vessel shuddered violently, alarm shrieking as armor plating was ripped into the void. But the Revenant, lodged deep in the engineering bay, acted as an anchor, holding the flagship slip space bubble intact just long enough. Dropping out of slip space in 3 seconds, the ship's automated voice announced, translated perfectly by Ford's onboard AI. Ford threw Xyler to the floor. "Look out the window, executive. Look at what you woke up." The violet swirling of the tunnel shattered like glass. The Invictus exploded back into normal space. They weren't in the Sol system. They were hovering directly above the grand jewel-toned nebula of Sector Prime. Below them, massive and unsuspecting, was the Galactic Council's orbital citadel. The Invictus was heavily damaged, venting atmosphere and bleeding plasma from a dozen hull breaches, but its forward momentum was catastrophic. It was a multi-million-ton bullet traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, aimed directly at the heart of the alien empire. Impact in 10 seconds, Ford's AI chimed. Ford didn't brace for impact. He simply stood on the bridge of the dying alien warship, surrounded by his silent mechanical brothers, and watched the Citadel grow larger in the viewport. Humanity hadn't just survived the Council's wrath. They had captured their lightning and hurled it back at their throne. Sirens wailed across the crystalline spires of the Orion Syndicate's orbital citadel. For thousands of years, this station had stood as an untouchable monument to bureaucratic supremacy, a shining jewel suspended in the Sector Prime Nebula. It had never seen war. It had never known the crude, brutal mathematics of kinetic bombardment. Suddenly, the void shattered. The flagship Invictus, crippled and bleeding atmosphere, materialized out of slip space mere kilometers from the Citadel's primary habitation ring. It was traveling at roughly 4% the speed of light, a slow crawl for interstellar travel but an apocalyptic velocity for a physical collision. Alarm shrieked in the grand chambers of the council ministers, but there was no time to evacuate. There was barely time to blink. The Invictus struck the Citadel's central axis like a spear of solid tungsten, piercing a delicate glass ornament. Snort's the kinetic displacement was catastrophic. Millions of tons of alien alloy crumpled, folded, and vaporized in a blinding flash of hard radiation and friction. The station's kinetic barriers designed to repel meteoroid impacts and precise laser fire were entirely overwhelmed by the sheer unadulterated mass of their own flagship. The impact tore the Citadel in half. The lower habitation ring spun out of control, detached from the main spire, their life support failing as they tumbled helplessly into the frozen vacuum of the nebula. The upper command hemisphere was completely gutted, filled with the burning, wedged wreckage of the Invictus. Back on Earth, deep within the Cheyenne Mountain complex, absolute silence reigned in the war room. General Thomas Sterling stood with his hands locked behind his back, staring at the massive holographic display. The Palantir virus deeply embedded in the alien communication network fed them high-definition telemetry of the carnage in real time. He watched the Citadel burn, the glowing embers of the shattered station drifting like fireflies in the dark. "God in heaven," Sterling whispered. The sheer scale of the destruction chilling even his Batley-hardened blood. "We actually did it. We broke their spine. We didn't just break their spine, General." Director Olivia Croft said smoothly, stepping into the glow of the hollow table. "We executed a hostile takeover." Croft gestured to the far side of the room where a civilian observer sat in the shadows. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair immaculate despite the bunker's sterile environment. This was Richard Bennett, a senior managing director from BlackRock's newly minted extrasolar asset division. "General," Bennett said, his voice as dry and cold as dead leaves, "genocide is a terribly inefficient use of resources. Snorts, we didn't send Team Onyx to simply wipe out the Orion Syndicate. The galactic economy is vast, untapped, and currently managed by emotional, risk-averse bureaucrats. Our objective was to remove their upper management." Sterling turned, his eyes narrowing. "You corporatized a military strike. The military-industrial complex is a partnership, General," Croft intervened. "The Palantir virus didn't just hijack their navigation systems. While Team Onyx was slaughtering the Taurian guards, the virus accessed the Citadel's decentralized banking ledgers. It spent the last 20 minutes aggressively shorting the Orion Syndicate's core trade commodities and transferring their liquid assets into encrypted quantum wallets controlled by the United States Treasury and our private sector partners." Bennett stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "By tomorrow morning, the Galactic Council won't just be militarily defeated. They will be entirely bankrupt. Earth will hold a controlling stake in their interstellar infrastructure. But for the paperwork to be finalized, we need a surviving signatory." Sterling felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. The aliens had thought humanity was a pack of rabid animals. They hadn't realized that the true apex predator of Earth wore a suit and carried a ledger. "What about Onyx?" Sterling asked, looking back at the burning wreckage on the screen. "Nothing organic could have survived that impact. The G-forces would have liquefied their brains." "Baseline organics." "No," Croft agreed, tapping her data pad to bring up a secondary telemetry feed. But Team Onyx was built by Lockheed Martin. They come with a warranty. Aboard the ruined husk of the Invictus, embedded deep within the melted slag of the Citadel's command spire, the Revenant lay silent. The human dropship had acted as the ultimate crumple zone. Its ablative armor was completely gone. Its tungsten frame warped and twisted into an unrecognizable knot of metal. Inside the drop bay, it was pitch black. The emergency crash gel, a highly advanced non-Newtonian fluid designed to absorb catastrophic kinetic shock, had flooded the cabin seconds before impact. It had hardened into a dense concrete-like substance, encasing the augmented operatives in solid blocks. For 10 minutes there was no movement, then a faint mechanical whirring broke the silence. A high-frequency plasma cutter ignited in the dark, glowing cherry red. Operative Grant slowly carved his way out of the hardened gel. His matte black armor was severely compromised, his left arm hanging by exposed synthetic tendons, but his vital signs remained stable. His neural AI rerouted power from his damaged limbs to his core servos. He kicked the shattered remnants of his pod door outward. Onyx Actual Grant transmitted through local comms, his voice glitching heavily through static. Status check. Nearby, the hardened gel shattered outward with a violent crack. Jackson Snorts Ford stepped into the dim, sparking light of the ruined bay. His cybernetic optical sensors recalibrated, glowing a faint, menacing red in the dark. Cognitive functions nominal, Ford replied, cracking his reinforced neck. Suit integrity at 40%, casualties. One by one, the surviving members of Team Onyx broke free from their encasements. Operative Riley had lost a leg below the knee, crushed by a collapsed bulkhead, but he calmly applied a molecular tourniquet and hoisted him. Self-up using a plasma rifle as a crutch, Operative Bishop was missing half of his face plate, revealing the terrifying chrome-plated skull beneath his synthetic skin. Out of the 12 who launched from Earth, 8 had survived the apocalypse. Form up, Ford ordered, kicking open the jammed breech door. The mission is not over. We have an acquisition to finalize. The Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Council was a ruin. The massive domed ceiling had collapsed, exposing the room to the hard vacuum of space, held back only by flickering, failing Snort's emergency atmospheric shields. The polished marble floors were covered in shattered glass, burning debris, and the crushed bodies of alien dignitaries. At the center of the room, huddled behind a fallen pillar of gold and platinum, cowered High Minister Vaylor. He was the supreme political authority of the Orion Syndicate, a frail, multi-limbed creature adorned in robes that were now stained with soot and terror. Surviving Citadel security forces, a mere handful of terrified guards wielding depleted plasma rifles, Snorts formed a desperate ring around him. They expected the silence to last. They hoped the crashing ship had killed the human monsters along with the station's upper echelon. Heavy synchronized footsteps echoed through the smoke. The alien guards raised their weapons, their hands shaking. Violently, through the thick haze of burning coolant and melted wiring, Team Onyx emerged. They looked like demons dragged fresh from the underworld. Sparks flew from Bishop's exposed cybernetics. Ford's armor was slick with alien blood and crash gel. They didn't run. They marched with the slow, inevitable rhythm of an execution squad. Halt. The captain of the alien guard shrieked, firing a plasma bolt that harmlessly splashed against Ford's heavy chest plate. Stay back. Ford didn't raise his weapon, he simply nodded to Bishop. The massive operative lunged forward with terrifying speed, ignoring the plasma fire that scorched his artificial skin. He grabbed the captain by the helmet and crushed it like a dry leaf. The remaining guards broke, dropping their weapons and fleeing into the wreckage, utterly broken by the sheer psychological horror of the unkillable humans. Ford walked up to the fallen pillar and looked down at High Minister Vaylor. Please, Vor begged, his translator collar whining as it struggled to process his panic shrieks. We surrender. The sanction is revoked. Earth will be left alone. We will draw a quarantine line. You will never see our ships again. Just spare us. Ford stared at him with empty, pitch-black eyes. He reached into his damaged armor and pulled out a sleek, intact communication relay, dropping it onto the marble floor at Vior's feet. A holographic projection sprang to life, displaying Director Olivia Croft, perfectly calm, holding a cup of coffee. High Minister Vaylor. Croft's voice echoed through the ruined chamber. I accept your surrender. However, the terms you just proposed are entirely unacceptable. Vaylor stared at the hologram, bewildered. We yield. What more do you want? You have destroyed our fleet. You have shattered our citadel. You have won. We don't want to be left alone. Croft corrected, setting her coffee down. Earth is overcrowded. Our resource pools are draining. We look to the stars for expansion. And you attempted to murder our pioneers in the dark. You forced us to open the black sites. You forced us to let the monsters off the leash. She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes cold and calculating. By the authority of the United Terran Alliance and its corporate backers, we are hereby claiming eminent domain over the Orion Syndicate. As of this exact moment, your shipping lanes belong to Amazon Orbital. Your mining colonies on Giza 832C Snorts and beyond are now the property of Rio Tinto and Halliburton. Your automated defense grids have been locked out by Palantir's AI, and your central banks have been liquidated by BlackRock. Vaylor gasped, his multiple limbs trembling. You cannot do this. The galactic community will rebel. Trillions of citizens will rise up against you. You cannot occupy a galaxy. We don't need to occupy it, Croft said with a chilling smile. We own it. If any planet refuses our trade terms, if any governor attempts to assemble a militia, we won't send an armada. We won't engage in prolonged, expensive planetary sieges. Croft gestured toward Jackson Ford, who was calmly reloading his heavy rail rifle. We will simply send them Team Onyx and the thousands more currently thawing in the Antarctic ice. We will deploy them to your capitals, your bedrooms, your high-security vaults. They don't sleep, they don't negotiate, they don't feel pity. Veer looked from the hologram to the towering scarred nightmare that was Jackson Ford. The High Minister realized with absolute crushing certainty that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The era of refined bureaucratic diplomacy was dead. The era of the human military-industrial complex had begun. Place your biometric signature on the data pad, Minister, Ford said, his voice a mechanical rasp. He pulled a heavy tablet from his waist and held it out. Sign over the syndicate or I will sever your limbs, cauterize the wounds, and force you to sign it with your tongue. Vor sobbed, a pathetic, broken sound that echoed in the vacuum-sealed ruins of his empire. With a shaking hand, he pressed his palm against the glass of the data pad. The screen flashed green. Asset acquisition confirmed, Ford reported, turning away from the broken alien ruler. Humanity had not just survived the Galactic Council's wrath. They had weaponized their own darkness, packaged it, and sold the galaxy back to itself at a premium. The stars didn't belong to the peaceful, the enlightened, or the ancient. They belonged to the ruthless. And so the Galactic Council learned the hardest lesson the universe has to offer. Never attempt to assassinate a species that views the apocalypse as a lucrative business opportunity. Earth didn't just fight back. They orchestrated the most brutal corporate takeover in the history of the cosmos. If you enjoyed this dark military-industrial twist on HFY Sci-Fi, please hit that like button. It sends a huge signal to the algorithm and helps the channel grow. Share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans and make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on the next epic story. What did you think of director Croft's ruthless tactics? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep your eyes on the stars.